This is the Beyond the Dojo podcast. I'm Lauren.
I'm Jeremiah.
And do you remember a few weeks ago when we were driving into town, which this happens all the time, but somebody was really coming up on our butts and then went around us. And I was like, oh, he's got a karate sticker on the back of his car. Do you remember what you said? Jeremiah says he doesn't know Budo. Freaking idiot.
Well, obviously.
I was like, this is true. He really doesn't.
Yeah, one of my idiotic moments, yeah.
No, it's just a pet peeve with the passing. You guys, if you pass like that, you don't know math, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we wanted to recount a little story that happened recently, and I wasn't here. I got all of the details on the phone, but Jeremiah, you want to kind of dive into what happened here a few months ago?
A couple months ago, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first, we've been having this issue with this guy kind of going into people's houses, going around people's property, kind of checking things out.
Staring at their teenage girls.
Looking through their windows,
Yeah.
looking at their baby girls. And it got to a point that he was stalking our neighbors across the street pretty severely. And they had a couple interactions with the girls that lived there and their father. And it was back and forth verbally, and he would leave and then come back 10 minutes later. Well, the father came over and told me that he was hiding on our driveway. Our driveway doesn't have lights, so at that time, so it was a convenient spot for him to be able to watch them without being seen. So one night, he came over and he said, that boy's in your yard again. He just kind of gave me a heads up. I called the cops to see what I could do legally. I was like, hey, what can I do here? And I'm on the phone with the cops as I hear something outside. So I walk around the back of my house, and he's in our driveway. He's literally came back within 5 minutes of being ran off. He's in our driveway again.
And crouching down.
Crouching down, trying to not be noticed. I'm in my flip-flops. I got my pajamas on. No shirt, just the shorts on. So I'm looking redneck as all can be. Big old gut. Wow, what you doing? Mm-hmm. And hindsight says I approached it the wrong way. Hindsight says, and advice from very, very respected, very dear friends, said, you went about the wrong way. You should have went with the attitude of handling business, being very direct with what your intentions were. I went in there big dogging. I was yelling. I had the cops on the phone still, so I'm get off my yard, get out my drive, cussing the boy, trying to just big dog my way through it. And he would take a couple steps and stop.
Looking at you?
Yeah, he would stop. He would stop and kind of look at me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, so I'm chasing him further, keep on yelling at him, and he decides, he's going to stand his ground. And he kind of threw his hands up like I'm ready to fight. I'm like, okay, cool. I threw the phone in my pocket, with the cops still on the phone. On the phone.
Yeah.
I'm ready to go. We're about to do it. And we're yelling at each other back and forth, kind of flinching and everything. And then he kind of it's to me at the time I felt like he kind of was he dropped his hand and walked off to the side like he was about to leave. And I just that's kind of strange. And by the time I turned to see him, he clocks me twice, hits me in the eye, bam, bam. I'm
the same arm?
No, it's a double. It's 1, 2.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, huh. And I just yell. I kind of it wasn't I think it was one of those reactive kiais. When you get hit, sometimes you just know to kind of, blow your air out. And I did that. And I looked up at him, and he looks at me. He's like, with that, oh my God look, oh shit, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, it's over now. And I started going after him, and he just runs down the road.
Yeah.
He had cut my eye a little bit. My eyes were a little swollen. And, I took it as a defeat. Honestly, I took it as I just got my butt whooped, right?
Not really, but okay.
And it just pissed me off. And it made me think about, we say it all the time, there's no protection for sucker punches.
Right.
But in reality, there is. And this is where I'm thankful for the advice I get from friends, teachers. And one of my teacher told me, he said, you went about it all wrong. Your attitude and the way you thought about the situation was wrong. He says, you were just trying to run your mouth, and he was ready to fight. Made sense. And he goes, when you get in those situations, no matter what, you need to be ready and preparing yourself to be in an altercation. And that just was like, duh, good job, Jay. Because, a lot of us walk around and go, yeah, I'm always ready, I'm always on the alert. But are we really?
It's so complicated, though, when you get in a situation like that. Because, going through his mind, I'm sure, was we don't own the property we live on. So, I've been through concealed carry courses, and there are specific legalities on what kind of weapon you can have when you defend yourself. And there's all this, castle doctrine and all this kind of stuff. And granted, you weren't using a weapon. But it's there are legalities as far as what you're actually allowed to do and when,
honestly,
depending on whether or not what the situation is. So all of that is an issue too.
Yeah, the initial thought wasn't really, honestly, it was okay, just run them off. The cops are on the phone, run them off, and then talk to the cops look, man, this is what we're dealing with. But he wouldn't run off. He wouldn't just leave.
I just think it's hilarious that he was on the phone with the cops, and then the altercation happened while he was on the phone, and then Jeremiah pulls the phone out did you hear that?
Well, actually, what I said was, you dumb SOB.
Yeah.
The cops heard everything. You stupid MF.
Oh my God.
And then the cop's like, hey, you okay? I'm like, yeah, you got me. He's like, oh, we're on our way. We're just around the corner. But honestly, the thought process through the whole thing was, at first it was just run this boy off. And then I say boy, he was, early 30s?
He's my age.
He's
we
30,
graduated
right?
together, yeah.
So the first thought was, oh my gosh, if Lauren was here, by herself,
right?
If we had children, and it just, my emotions kind of ran over me, and I got emotionally invested and angry, and wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't keep that separated and handled business. I was like, oh my gosh, this could be something serious, and it allowed me to kind of lose my focus. The second thought was, okay, what can I do legally? How can I handle the situation without causing me to go to jail? Because it is what it is, right? If you get in an altercation, both people are going to jail. That's just the way it is in Florida.
Well, I'm not 100% sure on that, and we may need to ask, because if you think so?
I'm pretty sure, because the first question the cops asked me when they saw me, they go, let me see your hands.
Yeah, okay.
And I showed them the hands, and there was no kind of signs of being in an altercation at all.
Right.
And that, I think, in itself kind of cleared me of anything. And I did the thing that I thought was right, and that was to press charges.
Right. Yeah, so. I think the scary part, too, another, overthinking thing is, okay, so you're concerned about being arrested, which sucks. Yeah. But then the flip side is oh my God, what if he had a weapon and it had been more serious? And your concern the whole time was, I don't want to get arrested, and yet, you're put at risk for not fighting back. I feel like there's this catch-22 for anybody trying to defend themselves, regardless of the institution.
What I'll say to that is this, in hindsight, handle your business and deal with the legality afterwards.
Yeah.
If you're doing the right thing, you're being, you have Budo in mind, where you're doing the right thing. You're not, beating up innocent people.
Not
you're
intentionally trying to fight somebody.
Yeah, and you're defending yourself, then do the right thing and deal with the rest, right?
Yeah.
And then that was exact words of what our teacher said was, hey, do what you have to do and then worry about the rest later, because what's more important right now? And it made sense, right?
Yeah. So
I got a little bit of a swole eye, got a little bit of a cut on my eye. Mm-hmm. Cops came, they looked at my hands, they didn't see that I had any fight, and I wasn't in an altercation. They got the boy that night.
Yeah.
He had run after. The funny part is, I think he thought he was going to hit me, and I was just going to cower down and be like, oh, he got hit, okay. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of stood at him, and I literally said, you messed up. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get you. I'm going to get you. And
I'm sure the cop heard that.
and he that's when the boy turned around and ran.
Right.
And I'm not going to run after nobody.
Yeah, I know.
Not going to do that. So I just kind of stood there, and that's when I, was like, I got the cops on the phone. You're stupid. Blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. But lesson learned is, no, you cannot defend on a sucker punch, but you can create less of an opportunity for it to happen. If I'd have kept my focus on him and kept my angles correct and kind of kept me standing in a situation where I was able to see everything he did and was able to kind of keep square with him, it wouldn't have happened the same way. And that's, to me, is the solution for sucker punches, is don't be vulnerable for it. Don't lose your mental fortitude and get caught up in your emotions and forget the goal at hand. The goal at hand is don't get hit, right?
Right.
And that's where I messed up. I took it and I dropped that focus, and he took advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, anybody who is, like, he's obviously a lot smaller than you, little skinny kid, not very fit. So
I don't think he's smaller than me, but I don't think you'd call him a skinny kid.
okay, well, he's a lot smaller framed than you are.
He's a smaller frame than me, but he obviously is a manual. He did manual labor.
Right.
So there's that.
But I think they'll do little sneaky things like that, like try
Right.
to catch you off guard. And
I think even one of the guys from the dojo was saying, that's how they fight nowadays. It's not this, we're going to beat each other up. It's just, how can I stick you a couple times and then run? And that was the other thing. I had a misconception of what interaction was at that moment.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's where I fell apart again. It was a mental approach that was flawed.
Yeah.
And I'll admit that, man. I deserved that punch because, in a way, I allowed it to happen. Like, I dropped my ball. All the training we talk about and all the work we do to get ourselves ready for that point, and mentally, I was not focused enough to handle it.
Yeah.
And that's where I was really upset with myself.
Man, but it is just, like, emotions aside, to fight against an opponent like that, like, we don't train that way, because the people we're training against are willing to put up a fight. So we're training against somewhat skilled fighters, not people who are little sneak attack, little B words and then run off.
Yeah. But if that's the game that's being played, that's the game we need to investigate. If that's how it's going to be, then we need to be ready for that. And like I said before, I was just mentally ill prepared. I wasn't prepared mentally to handle this situation.
Yeah.
And if you want to be someone who feels like they're safe with their own hands, you have to be willing to not only be physically ready and tactically ready, but you have to be mentally. You have to have that fortitude of, like, you have to have that clear cut mind and separation of emotion and focus on what needs to be there.
Yeah.
Biggest lesson for me was, he got me once or twice. It didn't hurt, but my ego, it got bruised. It was one of those things. It's like, man, how did I let this little meth head hit me, and I didn't get a hit in. I didn't get anything back, and he just runs off. And that bothered me for a while. And it just comes back to, the old school training. Some of you guys will understand this, and some of you won't. The old school training was, you just did 1,000 repetitions of stupid things, right? You did step and punch all class or something, right? But sometimes, the teachers even call it. They would say it's spirit training, right? And the spirit training was this idea that, you separate how you felt about what you're doing.
Yeah.
The struggle of not wanting to do it. The emotional part of, like, why am I doing this? And you just kind of put your head down and do it, right?
Sure.
And, as much as I don't like that kind of training, there is value to it, right? So.
The cat keeps meowing at us.
Yeah.
Get her to go away. Wow, thanks. I feel like that, to me, it's more complicated, because I can see working to separate your own emotions, like how you feel about what you're having to put yourself through. But when it comes to somebody else, like now I'm involving another person, or they have involved themselves, to me, that's what made it more complicated when I had that situation happen last year, where it was like this person is he was attacking his wife, and then he was attacking me, and it's like, even then, there's a part of you that's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to engage in this situation, but I know I can't allow myself to get hurt. I don't want to really hurt this person, not really. So I feel like that makes it more complicated, because it's not just what I'm putting myself through. It's now how is this going to affect this other person?
Yeah, no concern of mine.
I know. Well, it shouldn't be a concern of anyone's, but
no,
yeah, I know.
You know what I mean? It's like, listen, the situation, I didn't ask for him to be in my driveway. I didn't ask him to be a fucking perv. Excuse me. I didn't ask him to do a lot of things. Mm-hmm. But the situation is what it is, mm-hmm. right? And it is what it is, right? Yeah. And I'm not gonna. If I had to do over again, if I had the situation to do over again, I wouldn't have talked as much. I just told him to leave.
Yeah.
And if he refused to, I would calmly out my distance, tell him to leave again. He refused to. I would have just hit him. Mm-hmm. I would have hit him several times. Yeah. I would have knocked him as hard as I could. And then I'd stood there and say, if you want more, stay. If you don't, leave. Mm-hmm. And kept it very businesslike. Yeah. But I didn't.
Yeah.
You know, my voice got louder. My anxiety, my anxiousness got louder. And it took control of what I should have been doing. And that's stay cool, calm, and collective in the moment. Yeah. And I didn't do that. You know what I'm saying? So it is what it is. Like, even in situations where you were playing the hero, right? In a sense, because there was an action going on, mm-hmm. and you were saving your friend, mm-hmm. right? To me, it's easier to go, that's the bad guy.
Yeah.
That's the guy I got to stop, click,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
This is a little different, because it's like, in my mind, there was no physical altercations going on.
Yeah, right.
He's a weirdo, but the cops have been informed.
Right.
I had the cops on my phone. Mm-hmm. So it was more like, gray area to me.
Yeah, I get that.
So, not because I didn't want to hurt the guy, it's because, in my mind, having the history I have, and mm-hmm. knowing that sometimes when you're effed up, when you're messed up on drugs, mm-hmm. reality is not what reality is.
Right.
You're living in this world that is reality, but the interactions and how you perceive what's going on is completely different.
Yeah, and that's totally how that guy was that time with me. Nobody was home.
Nobody was home, right? Yeah. And that's kind of how I felt here. And it's like, well, I didn't feel bad for the man or the boy.
Sure.
I didn't feel bad at all. It was just like, I knew his reality wasn't what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like he was psychotic towards someone and very violent. Mm. It was trapped in his own, struggle within himself.
Yeah.
Because, we've talked to this girl's father, and the father said, when he's sober, he's a different person. Mm-hmm. And he's regretful and repentant, you know? He said to the father, when I get on it, I can't control myself.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit of a struggle there, but at the same time.
But I think that, okay, he's obviously dealing with addiction issues, and that's his personal issue he needs to get help for, and hopefully he's better, because he spent 6 months in jail after that.
Right.
But, that doesn't mean that when you interact with that person, you have to debilitate. Well, I mean, you're debilitating enough to get away and get safe, but not maybe so much to maim forever. I mean, granted, we always tell people that if your life is at risk, that person's life is essentially forfeit. I mean, and that sucks. Yeah. And I know it's complicated, but, more than likely you're not going to maim them for life, so you got to kind of go for it.
But with someone with a lot of experience, not even and I'm not saying fighting experience, talking about just dojo sparring, mm-hmm. violence, and interaction. Mm-hmm. When that person isn't going to fight back. You know that, right? And if you're a good person inside, you could tell the lesson's been taught, and you just move on.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that, I think, in a way, honestly, God stepped in and saved us both.
Yeah.
He kept me from going to jail because of beating this dude's ass. And he gave an opportunity to that dude to clean up,
Yeah.
become sober,
Oh yeah.
and have time to reflect on what he's doing.
Yeah.
Does that change that dude? I don't know. I haven't seen him since. We ain't buddies.
Right.
You know what I mean? But in my perspective, it's like, okay, God taught me a lesson. You need to be more aware of what's going on. You need to be focused on what you need to do, you know? And when you have to be a soldier, be a soldier.
Right.
So...
yeah, a little bit more cut and dry rather than thinking through all of it. And, you know,
Right.
it's funny because you spend 20 plus, 30 plus years training and stuff like that. And I think, honestly, it's very different when you're in this scenario. Unless you have somehow exposed yourself to enough visuals or video of this happening or whatever. I think unless you have really studied or somehow like mentally put yourself in that situation until you've actually been in it, you don't realize like how complex it becomes in your brain, like how many thoughts run through your head, you know, how many steps you're turning it into versus just taking care of business. It's like, you know, this is where it's going to end up. You know it's going to end up being physical, but you're like putting all these things in the way before you get to that point.
For me, it's an age thing too, right? Because in my 20s, my teens and 20s, that scenario would be completely different. I wouldn't even talk to the man. I would just ran up, tackled him, and just start beating him because that's who I was then.
Sure.
But as I get older, A, I don't chase after anybody or run. B, there is that like self-conscious of what can you do here? What's the right thing to do? How can we handle this without getting to that point? As a young man, I'm like, oh boy, we get to fight.
Yeah.
I want to do this. As an older man, I'm like,
Yeah.
it's not that great. Because, you know, as a young man, after the fight, I'd be high off the adrenaline rush. My ego would just be flaring up. But when all that faded away, I felt guilty.
Yeah.
I felt like a bully.
Yeah.
You know, because in my mind, I mean, you've trained most of your life, Jeremiah. These people probably never been in fights before.
Did you feel any better with not having an interaction with the kid? I mean, not really.
Honestly, I didn't feel the guilt or shame.
Okay.
I felt my ego hurt.
Yeah.
The image of who I thought I was didn't play true to when the situation came.
Yeah.
So it was this question of like, am I truly that person? Am I ready all the time? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
No matter how much training you do, no how much thought and process, are you living that perspective of this situation could get bad? How do I handle it? Yeah. This situation is close to the heart. How do I separate it? You know, to be cool, calm, and collective, there has to be a point where your mental aspect is stronger than your physical, and that's where I fell apart. You know, my emotions got the better of me, and thus he got the better of me.
I know.
I beat myself, right? I think Sun Tzu says, know thy enemy and know yourself. Know yourself and know thy enemy.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people think of that as like, know your weaknesses, know what you can and cannot do. But it also means, do you know yourself enough to know what you'll do in that moment? The spirit, the mental aspect. And Budo makes more sense now. Tea ceremonies, flower arrangement, you know, there's not a lot going on there, right? But mentally, you know, how to arrange that flower arrangement to where it's just right, you know, it takes a lot of thought, a lot of desire, what you want it to look like and what it's looking like. Tea ceremony, the same thing. You're taking this long, prolonged mental effort, mental fortitude. And I think that's maybe was the appeal to those guys that were war hardened, you know, experienced, you know, life and death by the sword, very like close and personal, and they were able to just kind of separate themselves, and it was a way to practice that without the engagement. So yeah,
kind of like a safer discipline, maybe.
Yeah, it's a safer discipline, but asking the same kind of stress, the same kind of mental fortitude, right? I know it sounds like a reach, but trust me when I say
it. I think there's a routine there and like a practice, like a kata kind of.
And it's, you know, like meditation to me is inwardly, right? You're sitting there, you're thinking about your breath, you're thinking about what's going on and how to kind of calm past that, right? And then what happens is you forget about yourself, and the outside world starts to become louder. The cicadas get louder, the wind feels stronger, um, and I think that's the opposite of what you need when you're in a moment of altercation. When you're in an altercation, you need to be everything else is quieter and just the one thing. You're just that one focus.
On just that one.
And maybe I'm going about meditation the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right? But that's where I felt like I lacked.
When meditation, you typically will focus on one thing.
Right.
Eventually, you try to get your focus onto one thing.
Right, but it's not external. Right? Generally, it
can be.
The most things I've heard of meditation, the way to be in a meditative state is you focus on your breath. And once your breath gets to a certain point, everything else becomes louder.
Sure.
Where everything else you notice more, right? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. I don't know.
It's not wrong.
But that's what I understand it to be.
There's many ways of doing it.
Right. I think overall what I want to get across is this. If you're a martial artist and you're training for a long time and you spent years on the dojo floor, some of those old school approaches, they teach you things that you don't realize you need until you need them.
Yeah.
And I think, strategy, tactics, technique, physical ability is all necessary, but let's not forget the mental aspect of it. Let's not forget how to control your emotions in a situation, how to turn that switch on, not only physically, but mentally, and be like, okay, this is the objective. Let's do it.
I think not to end it on a negative note, but you have to also accept that if you don't cut it off at the pass here, it can escalate. So, like the situation that I had, I didn't know the guy had a gun. I could have ended up dead that day, and you could say to a point that was my fault. I could have done something more than what I did. Same thing here. This guy could have had some kind of a weapon. You hear situations all the time where there's just a basic altercation, and all of a sudden somebody grabs a weapon of some sort, and it's like, right. Why did it even get to that point? Why do people end up beating each other to a complete pulp when it could have been stopped earlier? Unfortunately, you do have to keep that in mind as well, is that it can go a completely different direction than what you would think. It might not end up fizzling out the way that you hope that it would. So,
but in the moment,
you have to be more aggressive.
I think in the moment, that's a recipe for failure.
What's that?
Is to be concerned about what could happen. You just have to deal with what is happening.
No, I get that, but okay. I mean, like, just not allowing it to not allowing it to escalate. To continue, yeah. Like trying to de-escalate, or trying to at least put yourself in a situation where you're safer, rather than continuing to engage.
I'm not by any means encouraging people to go out to be superheroes.
No.
And intervene where they're not supposed to be.
Right.
I mean, honestly, if that dude was stalking someone across the street but wasn't in our drive, I would yell at him and tell him to go on. But I wouldn't.
Right.
I wouldn't drive it past. I'd call the cops and be like, "Look, this guy's doing this every night. We could put cameras up and watch this dude, right?" But
Creep.
that's not what happened.
Right.
Florida, we have a moat law. Once they're on your property or in your house,
well,
it's called the moat law.
In your house, in your car is like I think it's like a castle doctrine or something. And
Michelle calls it the moat law, basically.
Okay.
Once they get on your property, once they cross onto your property, you're allowed to defend yourself. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But that's what I was dealing with for a while. Yeah. Great lesson in ego, great lesson in mental fortitude and how to do it. And the bright thing is I can reflect on it and go, you know what? I am a budoka. I do live my life that way because I didn't look at him to say, oh, he's a bad guy. This should have never happened. I looked at myself and said, hey, how can I handle this situation better? Right? Because you don't have control of what's going to happen to you, but you have all the control in the world how you respond. Right? And I think that's a big lesson in Budo itself, is this idea of a warrior's mindset in a peaceful time. And that's what I've been working on. So
Not getting whacked in the eye.
yeah, well, the other thing is, I thought I've been hit in the face so many times. I've never been cut. My skin's never broken loose because I've been hit.
Yeah.
And my eye got cut. So I think he had either a key ring on or something, and used that as a pseudo weapon. Because I don't see how I could have got cut.
He could have had really bony knuckles, dude, and just hit you right on the bone. Because that's where you were cut, was right on that orbital bone right there.
It's not the first time I've been hit there. And I've been hit harder, way harder in those areas, and never been cut.
Yeah.
So in my heart, I believe he had some kind of key ring on, or even maybe even something in his hand, that whatever he had.
He just scratched you real quick.
Yeah. So, what you working on?
Guys, sorry about the cicadas. Hopefully you can actually hear us. We don't know yet until we're done recording this. I'm working on wonkan. So, kind of working on the 3 steps on the way in on the kata, like the timing of that, which is kind of difficult. And then also like the transitions into the nekowashi, into the cat stance. Because that is also difficult to go from longer stances to shorter stances and still maintain similar height and similar posture and all that kind of stuff. Thinking through your kata in a way where the movements that you make with your torso and with the rest of your body would actually be effective rather than pulling yourself away from the technique. So that's a big struggle as well too. So kind of overall timing of things, and then
more like a
height.
rhythm, not timing of a technique, not like internal technical timing, but rhythm from one technique to the next.
Sure. Yeah. Well, no, actually, some of it is technique timing.
Okay. Yeah. Because I'm definitely there too.
Yeah.
I was working on wonkan, the same concept, so I would describe it as the rhythm. Steve said last night. He said, "What makes this kata difficult is the rhythm of the kata more than anything else." And it makes sense because there's crescendos in the movement, and especially that 3-step you're talking about, where it goes slow to fast to slow again, in a sense. And then just being able to time it correctly. Interesting kata. Yeah. I like the nekoashis. I like that pivot into them. But definitely it makes sense the way he describes it, why it would be considered a advanced kata.
I was gonna say, getting correction on that one and just seeing all the intricate details definitely makes a lot of sense why it would be.
Right.
Even though it's short.
It's short, and it's kind of relatively anybody can learn it. It's not like there's spectacular moves.
Right. It's not overly complicated necessarily.
It's not complicated at all. It's not super technical, but the rhythm aspect of it and the pace of things, and just the whole. Yeah, just everything about it.
I would argue that it is somewhat technical, though. There's some fundamental things there that if those are not down, it is so apparent.
Right.
In this
what
kata.
I'm talking about is like Gankaku is extremely technical.
Sure.
Like physically demanding techniques. That if you don't have the coordination correct or the strength to do it, it's pretty crappy, right? But wonkan, you could do the techniques and still kind of get it, right? But to get it better or more accurate or more to the better to the understanding of what we know it to be, it's definitely like the other things, like the rhythm and doing the kick punch and the timing of a normal step and punch.
Yeah. Well, right. I think they're all supposed to be like that, even like handy done. So.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right.
Fun stuff. All right, guys. Well, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Please don't think less of me.
We don't think less of you, dear.
I'm not no soft ass.
Bye.
Bye.